everyone. We are back with a new episode of With Love Soleil. And for our topic today, I'm going to answer a question that came in from Twitter, from the self-help section. And they asked me about integrating the shadow self and shadow work and low vibrational aspects of the self. And excellent question. Thank you for asking, because I think it's a really important topic to kind of actually bring together a lot of what I already talk about. So, much of what I discuss are the ways to sort of realize who you are, to find areas for growth, to empower yourself to become more of who you actually are, right? And a lot of this happens from what you'd call your shadow self, or in doing the shadow work. I'm going to juxtaposition this between shadow work and light work so that we kind of have a context for what I'm talking about here to start. So light work, or a light worker, is the one who kind of is out and just sort of revealing all of the light, right? Like the one who brings the light out of others and is kind of always talking light into their spaces, offering light into their spaces. They sort of radiate light. I generally consider myself a light worker in some ways, more so than maybe a shadow worker. It's like you feel the power of all, and you sort of live out and within the potential of all, and you can speak on that, and you call it forward within other people, and you applaud it, and you champion it, you kind of crown and align yourself, your life, and other people towards, higher vibrational experiences of life. That's what I would consider a light worker. So a light worker generally would be one to kind of, clap for others and try to empower others and help other people remember their power. And in my sessions, for example, it often ends with kind of a read of a higher self. So I'm sort of giving you the potentiality that exists sort of immediately for you, so that you can kind of go out and actualize that for yourself. On the other side of that then is the shadow workers. Now, the first sort of impression that comes through as I even say shadow worker is a shaman, shamanic energy. Shamans are often shadow workers because they're working with sort of the underbelly, so to speak, of the human experience. If you've ever been to a shaman, or if you've ever worked with a shaman, or maybe you even know a shaman, they're oftentimes the ones who are just willing to cut it straight. They're like blunt, and they're honest, and they keep it very real, and they're willing to tell you about yourself, and they're going to help you see the things you don't always really want to see. If you ever go into a shamanic session, it's almost in a way they're kind of clearing out the dense energy within you. They're clearing out any heaviness, any blockages, but in a way that's more of the term that's present is exorcism. That's kind of extreme, but it is that we all have lower vibrational energies. We all have heavy, dense energies that live in our bodies. And so the shaman is going to be the one that tells you straight up, when you do this, or when you behave in this way, it causes this to happen, and you're, selling yourself short, or you're lowering your vibration and acting in this particular way, or in, participating in these types of activities, or whatever it is. So they're the ones who kind of help you see yourself again, but more from like the stuff you don't necessarily want to see. This is the shadow side. This is the shadow work. This is the shadow self. The true master is the one who has integrated their light worker self and their shadow worker self, their light body and their shadow self. Because the truth is, the shadow is absolutely just as important as the light, 100%. In fact, I would even argue to say in today's day and age, it's almost in a way more important that we really look at our shadows, because the light, it's easier to stay in. It feels good. It helps you definitely raise your vibration, and it keeps you in that very kind of high frequency, but it doesn't necessarily like help you check your balances, right? It doesn't necessarily align you back to like also make sure that you're honest with yourself about how you move and why and what you do and your intentions and everything else. So it can be easy to sort of bypass the shadow self when you stay only in the light. This is why there's this big movement for kind of reducing this sort of love and light ideology, because it is sort of toxic to the whole of the human self, which is both light and shadow. We can't just stay in the light. That would totally bypass most of our humanity, which often is at least born in the shadow. So the shadow self then is the aspects of yourself that that where you maybe sort of feel uncomfortable, or that you don't love about yourself, or where you sort of move in ways that aren't necessarily like, helpful or beneficial. Say some certain things make you jealous. And so you sort of, undercut, or you move sort of passive aggressively because you're moving from the energetics of being jealous, instead of, healing the jealousy and then sort of empowering yourself by not moving in those lower vibrational energies. But we all do this, right? Every single person, unless you're a true master, which I only really know of Jesus as like a true, the Buddhas, like all of the ascended masters, certainly probably integrated all of it, right? They integrated both their light and their shadow to be a fully integrated human being. When you hear someone talk about someone being fully integrated, that's what this is talking about. It doesn't mean that they found the love and light and they're only there and they're only talking about 5D and they're astral projecting off into never land and fully in intellect and avoiding the humanity. It means they've found that and then they've embodied it. Right. I think the true ascension journey, I've probably said this before, is that we ascend from root chakra to crown and above. So we're vibrating up into our body and out, and then we have to come back down and actually be in our bodies. So to me, the truly awakened one is the one who's really fully in their humanity. They're in their shadow. They're aware of it. They can claim and own all that they do. They recognize their effect on themselves and other people and on the world. And they've sort of owned and mastered, or at least begun to sharpen their shadow side. Because the truth of the matter is, anything that you consider a shadow aspect or a shadow part of you can absolutely be used for your good. And it could still even be sort of a shadowy part of who you are, but you can still certainly train it to add to your value versus take away from. So there's so many angles I could take this in terms of what I even mean by that and what I mean by shadow tendencies. But all in all, it's often our shadow that ends up getting projected out onto the world. So if you want to go to Twitter, you want to see some shadow, people in their shadow, go to the comment section of Twitter and you'll see people just vomiting projectile shadow onto the world, onto other people ultimately, because let's all not forget that every account on Twitter has a person behind it. And so the people have to then read through their comments and see this just vial of unprocessed shadow selfness. So, that's the shadow self. And this is why I'm saying it's so important that we do shadow work and that we start to acclimate to and integrate our shadow self, because the world right now is ran by the shadow, unconsciously ran by the shadow. And that's what happens. I think the shadow and the subconscious, I would say, are somewhat similar in their context, and mainly because people aren't willing to look at themselves. So right now, I would say, at least in the context of modern reality, the shadow and the subconscious are somewhat interchangeable, and primarily because people aren't willing to look at themselves. When people are willing to say, I'm wide open, I want to know everything about myself, like read me to shreds when they go to readers, or they're seeing a shaman, or they have even friends or family who are willing to help them stay on their growth edge or check their blind spots, then, that's the parts of you that you're going to see and hear about when someone tells you about yourself, that you're like, oh gosh, yeah. And, maybe right away you might kind of want to respond or defend because it doesn't feel good to hear these things about yourself. But the truth is, the people who tell you about yourself love you. I would say, that's almost a higher form of love than the ones who just want to stay in the love and light with you, because they're helping you evolve. They're helping you see the stuff that you don't want to see. This right here is why relationships are a major, major, major component of the self-mastery journey, of the spiritual path, because you can do so much work by yourself. You can spend 10 years in solitude doing your thing, and then suddenly you're in a relationship and there's a whole nother dimension of your work that's still left to do, because there are parts of yourself that you can't see without the mirror of another person. And so relationships are required on the path to becoming more of yourself. Because it's easy to stay safe and protected in your bubble. And, there's stuff that comes up. You'll certainly meet your shadows when it's just you, 100%. There's plenty of shadow work to do. But in how you relate then to another person, you can't even get into the energetics of that until there's another person there to relate to. So relationships are actually a very powerful way of understanding and seeing your shadow self. If you have something that a lot of people tell you about yourself that maybe you've been denying, or you don't think that they have it totally right, or no, that couldn't be me, right? Maybe you want to look at that. because maybe they're helping you see something that you're not willing to look at, or that at least you can, integrate in some capacity to help you better understand yourself. Because again, all in all, the work here is not like it's shadow and ego. I'm going to relate here, because a lot of people think that we want to deny the ego, dead the ego, kill the ego, so we're no longer ego. We're human. If you're going to be human, you're going to have some capacity for an ego. So you have to befriend the ego. You integrate the ego instead of it being this bad separate thing that you're like trying to kill and smash all the time. You're actually just want to like, oh, okay, cool. That's present. I'm aware of it. I'm present with it. So it's here now. So cool. It's a part of me, and I'm going to learn how to work with it, versus like deny that it's a part of me. Shadow is the same thing. So rather than like trying to like get mad when people tell you about yourself, or when they help you see yourself better, or when the world helps you see yourself better, or when you help you see yourself better because you've like just blasted someone that didn't totally deserve it. Again, Twitter is such a great opportunity to see what I'm talking about, because people will tell you to like die in a quote tweet for having said something that wasn't like that serious. But it's just their shadow self just like begging to be revealed and revealing it to them. But of course, they're projecting it onto someone else. So this is why it's so important. This is why it's so important to do your shadow work, to be willing to notice, recognize, and claim the parts of you that you're not maybe totally proud of, or that you haven't sort of worked or sculpted or crafted to be something that actually benefits you or works to your favor. Because again, all energetics can work to your favor. All of the aspects of who you are may be built into your, say, astrological chart, or just at least built into your, energetic design or human design. They all have the capacity to be something that's beneficial to you, to be a strength for you. But you have to do some work. You have to do some polishing. First, you have to just be aware that it exists at all. And then you have to start to learn how to maneuver it to benefit you, to serve you, to support you, to work through you and your mission, to actually become something that's helpful instead of something that you're just constantly denying and projecting onto other people or whatever else. So the lower vibrational aspects of us can be transmuted and alchemized into higher vibrational aspects. The shadow self, in some capacity, will always be there, but we don't have to, if we're aware of it and we make friends with it and we integrate it, then it just works, in sort of coherence with the rest of our ecosystem of our humanity. So when you're thinking about shadow, and when you're thinking about your own shadow, and if you're starting to kind of get, go down this path, I encourage you right away to just, first of all, be willing to hear what you don't want to hear. A lot of times when I talk in these videos, and I've maybe offered you a little exercise to do, the last one was about sitting with attachment and noticing when you feel that sense of attachment, and kind of asking yourself the questions about what you're attached to and why. That to me is shadow work, because it's not comfortable. Nobody wants to sit in a sense of attachment and ask themselves questions. Like there's 100 million things most people would rather do, and there's 100 million things most people are doing instead of doing this work. So this is, a lot of what I talk about is actually what I would consider shadow work. Anytime I tell you to sit in the discomfort, this is shadow work. Because sitting in the light, sitting in the illumination, the ecstasy, the joy, the higher dimensional truths, like that is light work. That's amazing. It's beautiful. It feels so good. Sitting in the shadow is the opposite experience. It's like sitting in the bottom of your barrel. It's maybe feeling the shame or the guilt or the not goodness of whatever, aspects of yourself that are starting to reveal themselves. And then the work is to forgive yourself for the ways that you acted out of your shadow when you're not totally conscious of it. Because again, we all do that. We all have said things or done things that came totally from the projectile range of the shadow. And so you have to forgive yourself, because subconsciously, again, we keep score against ourselves. So if you aren't willing to sit with it, B, recognize it, and then C, notice the ways you've acted out of that space when you weren't aware of it, then that's kind of the first layer of befriending the shadow, right? It's like forgiving yourself for having been unconscious to it at any point, which we all were. And then from there, it's learning how to use it to your advantage, to your strength. So if your shadow is that you end up in power dynamics with people, you have this kind of deep sense of power, and you end up in kind of like power struggles with people or power dynamics with people. The work is then, okay, why is it a power struggle instead of a power empowerment? You know what I mean? Like, why am I struggling for power with other people? Or why is this dynamic present wherein we can both be totally in our power? And it doesn't have to be a struggle at all. In fact, the more empower I am, the more empower other people will be around me. And so you have to sit with that. Why is it a struggle? Okay, is it actually that I feel like I have to have the power? And so I'm not actually owning the power within me. Instead, I'm sort of trying to reach externally for it, and therefore it becomes a struggle. Or is there some other dynamic at play here as to why the struggle exists when in fact, I know I have the power. My power is what's causing the struggle, but I'm not actualizing it. Instead, I'm trying to use it to reduce other people. That's one example of, a shadow self characteristic that can ultimately be used for the greatest good. They say the Dalai Lama and Hitler could have had the exact same, say, astrological chart or design, but it was all about how they chose to use their aspects to become who they were and to then give them their sort of roles in the world. That obviously the Dalai Lama, mastered his aspects, did his thing, and, used even probably parts of his shadow self to benefit the whole. Hitler went the total opposite direction. So it's learning, it's being willing to learn about yourself. And it's sort of taking the pressure off of like really needing to be good or right or like have it all together. Like all of that is mostly a facade. In fact, even, what's good and bad to one person is going to be totally different than what's good and bad to another person. So you can relieve some of the pressure that you put on yourself of like needing to be perfect or good or, liked by other people, like all that additional pressure, because that's going to keep you away from being really able to see the fullness of your shadow, of the things that might not feel so good or that might not be liked by other people, or whatever it is. So you have to relieve your judgment first and foremost of yourself when you go into this work, because immediately you're going to want to judge yourself, and that will cause the shame or, the guilt that might kind of arise. And you don't have to do that. You don't have to do that. If you can accept where you are and be willing to look, you've already taken more steps than most. Right? Because most people are not even willing to look. They're just projectile out in the world, causing chaos, and it's everybody else's fault. And yet, ironically, it's always them, right? Like this is like the tale of the narcissist, is they're so not self-aware that they create all this chaos in their world, and they're constantly, creating all this chaos for other people and then blaming the other person for it, because they're just so unaware of themselves. They don't even realize that they're the center of the storm. So I would argue that there's a lot of people who exist in the world in this way, unfortunately, because we don't talk about shadow work. We are not encouraging people to even meditate, which is in some capacity always going to be a little bit of shadow work. But if nothing else, just be self-aware, read the room, see how you're affecting people. If you're in a conversation with people and you can't even recognize how their body language is shifting according to how you're acting or what you're saying, if you're not even tapped in with that, the person's standing in front of you, then we can see here where your shadow work starts, right? It's like right there. Usually it's boiling over. For people who have never done shadow work, you can tell it's kind of boiling over. And sometimes it's even boiling over in the terms of people who are like so happy all the time. And like, they seem like, so they're kind of almost like hyper happy. And it's almost like because they're like out of their body, because they're avoiding so much what's in their body that they're just sort of like on the brink of, it seems like, it's like, are you happy or are you just like is your nervous system totally fried? And maybe it's both, maybe that's just where they operate. But, anytime someone is like so out of their body like that, then it says that they're not in touch with what's happening inside, that they've kind of almost reached maximum capacity for what their spirit can hold, that they've been avoiding their whole lives. So this is why shadow work is so necessary. It really offers you the ability to be completely self-aware, completely, have complete personal agency over your life and over your experience, to own yourself, to own when you've maybe just acted out of a shadow? And can you recant that a little bit, or at least acknowledge that? You know, it certainly changes relationships dynamics majorly, because so many people act in relationships out of their shadow self and then stand on it, right? And then go harder on it, because it's like that, then that second aspect of the shadow comes through, where their ego or their pride is so, you know, kind of running the show that they can't even recognize, oh, I just said that and I didn't mean it, or that wasn't how that was supposed to be said, or I just put something on you that was actually my own stuff. So a lot of this has to happen in real time. You know, it's going to come through in meditation. And I think that's part of the reason why people are afraid of meditation, because they know that there might be stuff that they see about themselves that they have been avoiding their whole lives. And so obviously meditation is a great place to start, but your willingness at all to say, you know what, I'm ready to see what my shadow self's talking about. Like, I'm ready to see what's going on, and I'm ready to look at it. I'm ready to own it, claim it, figure out how to use it for my benefit instead of just letting it spew over onto the world around me. That's the first step. And, you know, as soon as you make any type of commitment to your own betterment, life is going to get on board. God is like, we've been waiting for you. And then suddenly your life is going to facilitate this practice, this process, and it will bring you opportunities for you to see your shadow. You'll start attracting in people that might normally bring the shadow out of you, or you might even notice in your reality people who really trigger you. You know, one for me, I'll be totally honest. I'm really not political. I was raised in politics, honestly. And at this point, I'm very much not political at all. But I'll be straight up. Donald Trump, for the longest time, really triggered me. I just really did not like him. He just felt very divisive to me. He was loud. He was just aggressive and mean, and he name calls. And like, for the longest time, I just was like, bad, you know, he's bad. And so I had to sit with that, because to me, he represents in many ways, and sorry if you're a Trump fan, you know, not to knock the guy, but let's be real here. He represents the shadow of humanity. I'm going to just say that. That's my perspective. I think he's unconsciously a shadow worker. But the problem is the unconsciously part, because he's certainly not, I don't think, necessarily out here like trying to, I mean, he says he's trying to, you know, clear the deep state. And that's literally kind of, you know, on a 3D level, what I'm talking about. We're clearing the deep state within ourselves. But he represents, you know, the pillar of, you know, greed and corporatism and money being, you know, the God. And, you know, just the divisiveness and just the rhetoric of America. If we're being honest, in many ways he does. So it's not surprising that he got to the place that he did, because he does represent a lot of the American values, unfortunately, or at least what the shadow of America idolizes and promotes and champions. So I had to look at him and see, and then I could find some forgiveness for him and the situation. And now I just don't care. But that, you know, he was helping humanity see itself, at least America, see itself a little bit better, because he's not just a one-off, like, where did he come from? Nobody thinks like this. Nobody acts like this. Yeah, they do. He's like the poster child for what we're working on repairing in America specifically, and, you know, all across the world, is clearing out, living from that just shadow, unpleasant, projectile space all the time. So he is an example for me of when I, you know, was working through shadow stuff, and I would attract in figures that would really trigger me. And I had to sit with why I felt so strongly about them, and I could process through and I could figure it out. And then it's neutral. Like, again, I'm indifferent at this point, and I feel that way towards most people. So again, that's another way that life will help you see your shadow, is by sending you people that really like just rub you, you know, people you really don't like, or you really don't resonate with, or really don't agree with, or hold totally different beliefs than you. Because again, ultimately, you're trying to clear out the place where no one holds any power over you. And when they hold power over your shadow, that's where the trick is, because we're so unconscious to our shadow most of the time that if somebody holds a power over your shadow, which might mean that they're trying to awaken it in some way or help you see it in some way, but you're denying it. So therefore they have a power, and they give you that rub, or that they trigger you, or they activate you in a negative way. Then all they're doing this whole time is trying to help you see yourself. But since you're denying this part of yourself, or you're denying that there's any value to this person or what they have to offer you or show you about yourself or what you believe in or what you participate in, then you're never going to get anywhere. So the whole path of self-mastery and spiritual realization is being willing to see yourself, especially the shadow, So I hope this offers you a little bit. I mean, this shadow work is like such a convoluted and complex topic that I could talk about this for so much more, but I wanted just to give you a little intro, answer your question a little bit to the self-help section on Twitter about shadow work and the shadow self and, alchemizing and transmuting the lower vibrational tendencies. And, again, all of this is not to be higher than anybody else. It's not to pretend like you aren't human, right? The whole point of the human journey, I think, is to be the human, right? To be the one who's aware of the human, but also the human. And the shadow is very much what lives in our humanity. It's the emotional aspects we haven't healed. It's the wounds, it's the triggers, it's the trauma. It's the not fun part, the depths of the human experience. And people can go their whole lives. Many people go their whole lives and never really even look into there. They never spend any time going through their shadow. It's easier to stay on the surface. You stay good. And you then end up in that kind of fried state where you've never met yourself. You're totally out of your body and you look happy, but at the core, you're like a total chaos and storm. And a lot of people just live like that. They build their whole realities around avoiding themselves. They build businesses on avoiding themselves. They become a master in a craft just so that they don't have to sit with themselves. Like, let's be real. A lot of the reason people do what they do is because it's much better and safer and easier to be championed for being a billionaire than it is to sit on your couch by yourself and do your shadow work. So this is what most people are avoiding. And if you're doing this work, bravo to you. You, to me, are a leader of the new, because the leaders of the new will be the ones who have integrated with their entirety of their humanity and who they are in all of the ways. That's going to be the full embodiment. That's Jesus energy, right? That's Buddha energy. That's the enlightened one energy of like, yeah, this is me. We're doing this thing in the human way. And I'm going to live out in this body and I'm going to do what I do. Like, that's, as simple as that seems, that's a master, but it takes a lot of going through yourself to even be able to get there, to really own that I know who I am now. I know who I am now because I've gone through the perils of myself. I've sat through the dark nights of the soul. I've gone through all the ego deaths. I've died and reborn myself a multitude of times to shed the layers of the shadow that aren't working, to integrate the ones that I can, and then to just reclaim the totality of who I am as a human being in all of the ways, not just the light. I'm going to leave it at that. Hope that helps you guys. Let me know what you think. Let me know if anybody else has any topic requests. I'm always happy to answer questions for you, and it helps me to give you guys a little bit more context when I have your questions and ideas. So thank you all. Thank you, self-help section, for asking, and I'll see you guys next time.